we will just improvise depending on when exactly he shall arrive. But without further ado, I think I would like to proceed and introduce our panel for today. And let me just say a few words of the panel and the idea behind it. So first of all, of course, it has been organized as a part of the Eastern Partnership Think Tank Forum. And the idea has been to bring in both policymakers and analysts to provide for a very sort of rounded and full debate on the future of the Eastern Partnership. We would like to combine two elements. First of all, we would like to critically reflect on the decade of Eastern Partnership. So basically looking at what did we get right, where did we succeed, but also where we didn't really fare that well and what we could do better in future. So basically looking at the past and thinking about future. So let me start introducing our panelists. We have really superb panel today, and we have three experts that will be covering basically the three associate Eastern partner states as sort of case studies. So first, to my far left, I have Julian Grosa, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for European Policies and Reforms here in Chisinau. He has also very much been involved with organizing this event. He is really the moving force behind this forum. He is also a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration of the Republic of Moldova. Then to Julian's right, we have Vano Chikvatse, who is the manager of the EU integration program at the Open Society Georgia Foundation. He has previously worked with the European Stability Initiative and the Eurasia Partnership Foundation, as well as at the Office of the State Minister on European and Euro-Atlantic integration. In the middle, we have Leonid Litra, who is currently Senior Research Fellow at the New Europe Center in Kiev. He has worked at the Institute of World Policy in Ukraine and as a Deputy Director at the Institute for Development and Social Initiatives here in Chisinau. These three gentlemen will give short introductions to the topic, and after their presentations we will have two very high-level discussions, two excellencies and very highly esteemed policymakers. I feel that they probably need no introduction in this room, but I will introduce them nevertheless. So we have the current Minister for Foreign Affairs and European Integration of the Republic of Moldova, Nicu Popescu, and the EU Ambassador here in Chisinau, Ambassador Peter Michalko. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. Let's start with Vano. And perhaps the brief here is really that give us three major wins within the Eastern Partnership framework from your respective countries. And also give us some of the harder lessons that we have learned along the way. So basically cases where we could have done better, not necessarily complete failures, but where we kind of underachieved and didn't quite reach our goals. So first three wins, and then first and three underachievements, and then finally a perspective to the future. So basically, what should we learn from the lessons, and how should we work further and really redefine and work on the Eastern Partnership framework to do better in future? So Vano, please.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the organizers for this great gathering. Just to follow your instruction and to divide those three parts, starting from the achievements, I think that the biggest achievement we had in the last 10 years, it was visa-free travel, because Georgia was, in case of Georgia, it was the highest refusal rate when it comes to the visas. So it is greatest achievement, and I would dare to say that the visa liberalization action plan was the most effective tool in the hands of the European Union, and it was one of the pushing factors for a lot of reforms in those a bit more than 3 years when Georgia was supposed to implement the FLAP. So far we have more than 300,000 Georgian citizens traveling to the EU member states and Schengen member states visa-free. The second achievement, I believe that this is a better opportunity to get the higher quality education. Georgia is 6 out of 131 countries who are benefiting from the Erasmus Plus scholarships, and I think that that's a very good opportunity, because so far we have something like 3,000 Georgian students studying in various EU countries. And also the involvement of Georgia in scientific projects like Horizon 2020, I would also name it as a success story. When it comes to the failures, I would say that they are a bit more than the successes when it comes to the Eastern Partnership. When it comes to democracy, and I would name several of them. First, about high-level corruption and clear signs of state capture. That's what we are witnessing in Georgia. Second, it's about the judiciary, and now in a real time when we are sitting here, there is a process of appointment of judges in the Supreme Court, and it does not meet any standards, I would say, and it's really getting worse and worse day after day. When it comes to the economy, 5 years already after the AA being in force, still it's and the CFTA, it's not a game changer in Georgia. And if you look at the statistics, you can see that basically there is no big changes there, despite the fact that this is a very short period of time. But still, there are the fields where we do see even situation getting worse and worse. Like unemployment statistics keeps the same, the poverty keeps the same and even gets worse. 22% of the population lives below the poverty line. GDP per capita remains pretty much the same, which is like up to 4,000 USD, which is 2 times less than Bulgaria, which is a poorest country in the European Union. And it didn't manage to bring the free trade FDA to the country. It's pretty much the same, or even worse. I think that another lesson is supporting or allocation of the funds. Georgia is getting up to 120 million per year from European Neighborhood Instrument, and it's per capita it's 32 euro annually. But when it comes to the effectiveness, it's really has to be reviewed carefully. Like if you look at the end part, which is supporting the agricultural development in the country, and which gives something like 180 million euro in 2013-2022. On the other hand, you see that the productivity of agricultural sector, or output of the agricultural sector, is dropping down. So that's another challenge, I would say. And when it comes to the way ahead or the future, one have to mention that actually the EU is the one of the trusted body in Georgia. Trust towards the European Union in the country is 71%, whereas the trust towards the state authorities, to the government, it's 37%. So EU is 2 times more trusted than the government. And when you look at the statistics, there are 3 particular fields where there is a higher expectation to the EU to be more active. One is the healthcare sector, another is education, and the third is job creation. I was very carefully listening to the discussions today, and I think that we are trying to be realistic. We are not pushing for the membership perspective, but what I want to highlight that membership perspective does not necessarily mean the immediate EU membership. So it means a starting of a process that would be a facilitator or will help the implementing reform. So that would be a very good idea, but since this is not on the table, I think that one of the possible scenario could be to carry out the feasibility study on possible joining of the European Economic Area and highs and lows of this, and I would recommend this to the European Union. And also, in a short term, as you know, Georgia and the European Union, and I think this is the same in case of Ukraine and Moldova, will soon start negotiating the new association agenda. And I would recommend to make this document as precise with measurable indicators as possible, because the current one, despite the fact that we tried both to make it more realistic and more measurable, it's still pretty vague. So I think that the new document should be easily measurable and to see where we failed and where we achieved some success. And my last point would be about the front runner, this famous label that EU is using. I don't think that this is helping, and I don't think that EU's approach to turn the blind eyes to certain things helps, because it puts us, civil society, in pretty tough situation, because we are tight-handed basically when we are criticizing Georgian authorities for wrongdoings or for failures. Sometimes we got the message from Brussels when they either keep neutral position or they are like praising the government for doing something, and that puts us in a corner basically. So I would end up here, and I would be happy to continue on this.
Is there something that the EU could help Georgia in fighting corruption, for example, since you mentioned that as a major concern?
Well, I think that if we look at the leverages, particularly after visa-free travel and EaP, there are not many that EU has over Georgia. But there is one leverage, which is the financial instrument, which was applied here in Moldova, and I think that this is something which could be considered very carefully if this trend of high-level corruption that I have to highlight here, that's the biggest challenge. If it continues like that, I think that the EU should consider to apply to this mechanism as well.
Great, thank you. Next we have Julian Grosa, and basically all the same questions: 3 failures, 3 successes, the way forward.
Thank you very much, Sini. Thank you all of you for being with us. Thank you, Mr. Minister, Ambassador, colleagues. Indeed, this panel is more focused on these 3 Eastern Partnership associated countries, and it also somehow builds on the work that we did together. I mean, the work that you and Stas have done with the EU Institute for Security Studies, with this shadow paper on trying to bring together all these ideas that hopefully will be brought further in the discussion in Brussels and in other capitals. So I'll try to briefly highlight first drawbacks, probably, that I can call in terms of reviewing back the 10 years of Eastern Partnership. I think we should look for these drawbacks mainly into the way that the reform agenda has been perceived and done in our countries. Looking at Moldova, we have basically 2 examples: the association agreement and visa liberalization action plan, 2 tracks, actually 2 5-year anniversaries that we also celebrated this year. And if you look at them, then you would see that whenever our bilateral agenda with the European Union was somehow driven by conditionality and benchmarking, there we have found more progress. And there where we have been more general, like the value part of the association agreement, we basically failed to deliver to the expectations that all of us had. Basically, reviewing the association agreement implementation for the last 5 years, that is one of our conclusions actually, that we have not managed to advance to the level of our expectations in terms of the reform agenda, in terms of democracy strengthening, in terms of rule of law, in terms of independence of judiciary. There were a number of attempts looking mainly at the legalistic part, institutional part, but the main challenge was the veto power of vested interests or weak or lack of political will to advance a reform agenda. That was basically one of the reasons why EU had to be more outspoken, more concrete, and imposing more conditionality with the financial assistance, with the development support driven to Moldova. And Moldova actually became one of the pilot cases in testing and applying this strict conditionality. Many criticized this strict conditionality approach of the European Union. However, in the case of Moldova, it actually brought results, as we have seen so far. In terms that the first, basically, positive result is that the EU image in Moldova has improved since 2015, after the famous banking fraud which was revealed in Moldova, where somehow people had a perception that EU was not enough talking about the issues, which I think it was more a perception, because I know personally that EU was very strict and very direct in terms of the gaps. But nevertheless, people had this perception. So why? That is the second basically backdrop, is European integration was too much politicized in this country. The association process with the European Union was very much politicized. We had the number of governments which actually took over the label of European Union, naming the governments. And of course, every government has its successes, but also its failures. And every time the government failed, and in our case, we failed big time back in 2015 with the revealed banking fraud. Of course, the perception of the people also became less positive in terms of the governmental institutions, but also with the European Union. However, thanks to the changing approach of the European Union, being more outspoken, being more strict, but also pragmatic, targeting reform agenda, targeting reaching out to people, bringing this narrative of the review, the EaP and Eastern Partnership, providing direct benefits for the citizens. I think this, plus you can add there the change of visibility and strategic approach of the European Union in the region, improving its presence, improving its communication agenda, but also targeting very concrete projects which can be multiplied locally. That actually provided the benefit for improving the perceptions of the European Union in Moldova over the last 5 years. So I think that is another positive. Vano have mentioned very well this the benefits of the visa liberalization action plan. Definitely, after 5 years, Moldova's implementation, we have over 65% of our citizens, if not more, benefiting from this visa-free travel to the European Union. It's over 2.2 million citizens who have benefited from that. And I think that is, if multiplied, added with the fact that we had the chance to join the European aviation space, bringing more mobility, more programs supporting youth, twinnings between cities, supporting agriculture development, investing in this sector. I think all these things provided another benefit that we can draw from the last 10, but mainly 5 years, is DCFTA from the association agreement, which definitely is the most visible, most concrete benefit that Moldova got out of the Eastern Partnership over the last years. Definitely, you look at the figures. You have almost 70% of the exports going to the EU market, 50% of imports. One of the myths which was speculated before we have initialed and signed the agreement was that our market will be flooded with EU like Russians said, cheap products and will destroy us and so on and so forth, which didn't happen. And to that, if you want to add some figures, I mean, we have our colleagues from expert group actually calculated that there is a net impact of the DCFTA to Moldovan economy of over 380 million euros over the last 5 years. There is over 5% impact to our investments, and there is over 15,000 citizens who have benefited from new jobs thanks to the CFTA. Few more things about drawbacks. As I said, the part which didn't work so far was the value part. So if to look ahead, probably one should think more, and this is what we all want, to find more concrete benchmarks, more concrete indicators for more difficult priorities of the reform agenda, which is very much connected to values. We had different ideas with Vano and Leo. We were discussing about piloting screening to identify new benchmarks. Vano already started in Georgia this exercise. We will also want to do that. That would bring more added value in terms of identifying new benchmarks and probably updating our association agenda with more concrete targets in the reform agenda. But more importantly, as we saw and we see, political will is the most, is the biggest driver of reforms. In our case, Moldova has now is going through this window of opportunity that provides some ground for pushing some reforms to insert some pinpoints, some safeguards. Whenever we talk about judiciary, about independent institutions, I think that is key, and it is very important that the EU is behind, is supporting that process. I think the more clear and more concrete we'll be on that, especially in Moldova, the more we'll advance to see the benefits out of the support and the agenda that we implement together with the support of the European Union. So I think I'll stop here. I will not go into details about the future setup or future ideas about the Eastern Partnership. I will leave that aside in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Just a very quick question on the communication strategy of the EU in Moldova. You mentioned that the public image of the EU has improved recently. Is this because of EU's better communication strategy in this country, or what is it related to?
I think it's related both to the fact that EU has changed the approach in the communication. Second, EU became more outspoken, and there is this element of consistency. You remember the first statement that Commissioner Hahn made here in Chisinau after the new government was installed and during his visit was that we will keep conditionality at stake, we will continue that, so it is very important that the new government continues the reform agenda, and we will be behind and will be supporting that. And the more EU was outspoken, the more credibility you got among the citizens, and I think all that add together, it helped to improve the... And one more last point, I think, this fact that over the last 2 years, EU has targeted its support towards citizens, towards other agents of change, going locally, going to support media, going to support civil society, going to support SMEs. I think, and last year actually we had something which was unprecedented for this region. EU has recalibrated its support from government to other agents of change, continuing that approach in terms of balancing the support that the EU is giving to reform, to macro-financial support, but with supporting other agents of change. On the long run, it will benefit all of us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then we shall proceed to Leo. Leonid, please.
Thank you. Thank you for invitation, for being able to speak here. We'll try to follow the same format of focusing on 3 successes, 3 failures, and some of the recommendations for future. I mean, above all, I think in case of Ukraine, we need to divide the Eastern Partnership in 2 parts. First is implementation before the Revolution of Dignity, which didn't mean much actually. and the implementation after 2014 and after the aggression of Russia, which actually helped Ukraine mobilize and deliver on reforms. I don't know whether we need the war actually to mobilize on reform, but apparently in case of Ukraine, unfortunately, this was the trigger which made Ukraine be more consistent. On the positive side, I see I have a big list. I'll mention only a few of them. Maybe to start with what Julian and Vanu mentioned, visa liberalization. For 2 years of visa liberalization in place from June 2017 to June 2019, we had about 43 million of crossings at the border, which is significant, I think, for 2 years. And this also had an impact on the, let's say, geography of destinations for Ukrainians. We have a lot of flights opened, connections with the EU. And I'll give you an example of is the region of Kherson, for instance, who used to have daily a train going to Moscow, now has one train a week going to Moscow, and has a lot of flights going to EU countries, mainly Poland, but there are some new openings. Second issue, what's very important, I think, is the energy dimension. Ukraine has been a problem in terms, well, a problem. There was a problem with the non-transparent energy deals in Ukraine, which resulted in big losses for the Ukrainian state budget and Ukrainian citizens. I think this changed a lot since Ukraine does not buy Russian gas, at least officially. And this was made possible with the implementation of the EU legislation in the energy sector, and the reverse imports, the reverse flow which takes place, I think, managed to make more transparent a sector which was highly non-transparent before and which was leading, as I told you, to significant budget losses. Third thing I'd like to underline is the acquisition system, the public procurement system. EU was the one who insisted very much on making more transparent the public procurement system, and Ukraine launched the so-called Prozoro system. Prozoro means also transparency in Ukrainian. Until for only 2.5 years, Ukraine managed to save, according to some estimation, to save about $2 billion from more transparent procurement. It's still not, I mean, perfect, but it's much better than it used to be before. On the negative side, or on the failures, I'd like to underline first of all the comprehensive institution building in Ukraine, which didn't work well. I mean, it was launched in 2009. We understand why it didn't work well, precisely because of the year it was launched. And the law under this program, the law on public service, was adopted only in 2016. Therefore, a lot of time was lost in the process, and it didn't work. So there are mixed results with the CIB program in Ukraine. Another element is the absorption capacity of Ukraine in terms of EU funds. We have, of course, positive examples when state institutions were able to implement projects as agreed, but we had also examples like, for instance, the border guard service, who had a project of 20 million euros, and for 7 years they were not able to spend any single euro, for instance. And therefore, there is an issue with this, and I think that in the future you could focus both on not only making funding available, but also on increasing the capacity to implement this kind of projects. One more negative development was the implementation of common aviation space, common aviation area. Moldova worked here much better in Moldova, but in Ukraine, you know, Ukraine became the hostage of disagreement between Spain and UK over the Gibraltar. And if Brexit happens, then the problem will no longer exist, actually. But this is, of course, a negative development because 6 years the agreement is signed, but it's not implemented. Few recommendations, quickly. I think that for Ukraine, the most important is for the next iteration of the Eastern Partnership, if it will be revised, and now it's the revision process, I think is to reinvent or add the security dimension. This, I think, is the relevant for all of the free associated countries. I understand that EU is not perceived as a security actor in classic terms, in which we think about this definition, and mostly about in terms of soft security, and Ukraine was quite often a subject of discussion in EU about corruption, because EU sees increasing the security also by fighting corruption. And I think rightly so. I mean, there was a reason to do this. But as the Russian aggression shows, we need also formats of extending, let's say, the soft security approach to adding new elements. This could be extension to participation in PESCO, or it could be extension of EU arm offices in regions. And this is already started to take place. I think this is a good development. Second element, this is the revision of quotas in terms of trade. The current quotas are based on data of trade between EU and Ukraine for 2006-2008. 11 years since then passed. And of course, this is no more relevant because the trade of Ukraine changed significantly, especially after the Russian aggression. And the last point, I think it's worth mentioning maybe something more creative, like policy shaping process in the EU. Ukraine signed up for transposing the EU acquis in many areas, but still EU is adopting laws which Ukraine has to implement them without having Ukraine have a say in this. And I think this would be important if EU adopts laws which will then be transposed to the countries like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Then these countries should have the ability at least to see the draft of this legislation, and to, if they have proposal, of course, to suggest them. This works with Norway, as I understand, with some other countries, and this could be tested, why not, in case of associated countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps immediate reaction. I mean, it seemed to me that you're kind of considering that corruption is something different from security, whereas I think that clearly there are clearly some connections there, and I think that corruption should probably also be considered a security issue, since hybrid influencing is taking advantage of corrupt structures, no?
Yeah, if I was not explicit enough, corruption is a problem of security as well, but I said that in the case of Ukraine, unfortunately, we have also some other security issues which are defined more in classic terms of corrupt security, and this is our neighbor from the east. But certainly corruption should be one of the main focuses still in case of Ukraine, fighting corruption. And not that I would like to exclude this in any case from the list of main priorities for the future.
Yeah, great. Thank you for clarifying that point. Next we have our discussions, and I have promised Nicu Popescu to go first, and also because he has to leave a bit earlier, I think that I would like to give him the chance of taking the floor and discussing the introductions that we just heard, and then probably would you prefer, Nico, to have the questions then immediately after your okay. Okay, great. Please, Nico, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here and to meet so many friends from both Moldova and not from Moldova. And, you know, that's a good occasion for us also to point where is our thinking regarding Moldova's performance and participation in the Eastern Partnership for the last 10 years. And I think the balance sheet is quite positive for us. And I think it's quite positive along several lines, and you've spoken about it. But from a Moldovan perspective, I think the single most important thing and result is the fact that in the last 10 years, Moldova got fully integrated into the European economy. Just to give you two numbers which tell you how profound is this integration, is that last year Moldova exported 68% of its goods to the European Union market. Just for a comparison, some 8% went to the Russian Federation. Just think about these numbers. What does it mean? It means that in the last 10 years, thanks to increasing exports to the EU market, jobs have been created in Moldova. Jobs have been saved in Moldova. Without access to the European market, Moldova would have been poorer with a higher rate of joblessness, with more unemployed people and more immigration. Because our goods have access to the European market, we have managed to perform on the economic front in a much better way than otherwise. Just in the last 5 years, since Moldova had a free trade area with the EU, Moldovan exports to the EU market increased by 60%. For a comparison, Ukrainian exports to the EU market increased by more or less 20%, and Georgia by 9%. So Moldova is by far the biggest beneficiary of the free trade area with the European Union from all the Eastern Partnership countries. And that saved our economy. In these years, Moldovan exports to the post-Soviet states fell by 500 million euro. They fell. And they increased to the EU by 700 million euro. Just process these numbers. Our access to the European market compensated the losses we incurred on Eastern markets, and then we have a top-up of 200 million. So thanks to the EU, we have more jobs, less immigration. Visa-free and connectivity and airlines, you refer to this. These are major successes. We're halfway through another important reform, and that is energy market liberalization. The template for Moldova is clear. Moldova is supposed to implement the third energy package of gas and electricity liberalization, as the EU did. So from January 1st next year, Moldova is supposed to apply the EU acquis communautaire, the European legislation and standards. We will be late a little bit, because if we really wanted to respect the deadline, some efforts should have been taken a year ago and at the beginning of this year, and they were not taken by the previous government. So because of that, we are slightly delayed. But from next year, Moldova will apply the EU acquis in this domain. It's part of our legislation, and it's part of European Union conditionality. Moldova's financing from the EU also depends on Moldova applying the standards of liberalized energy markets. And you can guess what this means in our conditions, because you know enough about Moldova to think through the implications of that. Where we could have done better, and you refer to this as well, but where we could have done better is on anti-corruption. We as a country, and not so much we as a society, but we as a country, we as a set of institutions have not scored well in combating corruption. In recent years, Moldova fell to the 117th place on the Corruption Perception Index. Moldova is now perceived by its own citizens as being more corrupt than it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And that's the single biggest fight that this government has to lead. And it's part of the explanation as to why in Moldova you have this innovative political arrangement in the parliament that supports this government. Which leads us to my next point, is trying to explain how we work as a government. You know that for the first time in Moldovan history, and for the first time from what I remember in the history of all Eastern Partnership states, we have a coalition consisting of parties which have different foreign policy preferences. Some political parties have been strongly in favor of Moldova joining the European Union. Some of them have also been willing to get Moldova closer to NATO. We have another political party which traditionally has defended the idea that Moldova should integrate and deepen engagement with post-Soviet structures, with Russia, with the Eurasian Union. So now you have this innovative arrangement where these countries, these political players came together to create a coalition. And the question is why? And the answer to that is because the degree of corruption in Moldova became so unacceptable that for the largest part of our society, the need to fight corruption became much more of a priority than what the population and various parts of the electorate felt about the geopolitical orientation of the country. For most, Moldovan society is indeed not, there are nuances and partly divided on whether the country should go east or west. But if you ask people what's the first priority and whether this priority is more important than the geopolitical orientation of the country, this is anti-corruption and capturing the state. And you know the story with oligarchy and, poor performance of the judiciary. Now, the situation from 6 months ago or a year ago was driving Moldova into a wall, not just domestically, but also geopolitically. Because of the high corruption levels in Moldova, because of the politicized judiciary and justice system, Moldova was losing geopolitical friends. Last November, the European Union suspended assistance to Moldova because of the politicized system of courts. So as of a year ago, Moldova was on paper pro-Western. In practice, it was becoming more isolated from the European Union and from the United States. USAID also put on the back burner the launch of new assistance projects to Moldova a year ago. So this is, these are the conditions that pushed the Moldovan political parties, and it's the Socialist Party and it's the Acum bloc, to join forces and combat corruption and improve the functioning of the institutions of the state. Now, where these political players have more differences, and it's easy to say, let's fight corruption, everyone is for it. But where the differences have traditionally been very visible is on the foreign policy front. So the question is, how do we manage that? And the way the political players manage this is that there is an agreement within the new parliamentary majority that Moldova will have foreign policy continuity on major foreign policy dossiers and partnerships. Foreign policy continuity means that Moldova will continue respecting its international engagements. So Moldova continues to apply the association agreement and implement it. Moldova continues to develop, and now we're in a new phase of talking about a new individual partnership action plan with NATO. Moldova continues to conduct joint military exercises with the US Department of State and the US military. Moldova continues to recognize Ukraine's territorial integrity, and there were, different statements a few years ago. We continue our strategic partnership with Romania. We're continuing all of those things. And we continue to continuously insist on the Istanbul commitments, on the need for Russia to withdraw its troops and armament from Moldova. These are all key elements of the political partnership in Chisinau, which gives us as a government enough of a mandate to continuously push things forward on anchoring Moldova closer and deeper into the European space. And I mentioned this, and the single biggest, most important way to do that here is justice reform, which is a way to address what Moldovan citizens want, and it's a way to address the single biggest insufficiency that we faced on the Eastern Partnership commitments front. And it's not because of Eastern Partnership. We need it for ourselves. If you want another uniting platform for our, geopolitical preferences in the Moldovan society, and I say it, yes, if you ask people, would you rather come closer to the European Union? Would you rather come closer to the Russian Federation? People have different answers. But I think where everyone is united is that if you ask the question slightly differently, and you ask, what kind of hospitals do you want to have? What kind of kindergartens? What kind of schools? What kind of roads? And here, 99.9% of Moldovans want to have European kindergartens, European schools, European roads, European prosecutor's office, European police, European court system. So this is what gives us this platform and this support in delivering on the commitments we took with the association agreement and with the need to perceive the European integration agenda of the country not as a set of geopolitical declarations, but as a set of deliverables at home. Now you have this question in the air, does geopolitics matter? Geopolitics matters. For our citizens, anti-corruption comes as priority number one, but it's true that we don't exist in a post-geopolitical, pre-geopolitical, or a-geopolitical environment. We are in a difficult region with difficult winds and tsunamis even on several geopolitical subjects, and we'll do our best to handle them as carefully as possible so that they don't flip our efforts here domestically to bring Moldova closer to European standards. The next steps, we're continuing the association, the implementation of the association agreement. And we're halfway through this. I think we've done pretty well in implementing on paper the right, not implementing, on adopting the right type of legislation. But the single biggest fight will be applying this legislation in the energy sphere, in the anti-corruption sphere, in the institutional reform sphere. So that if the last 10 years this country became fully integrated into the European economy, I think the battle for the next 10 years is to fully anchor Moldova in political Europe and in the European mainstream when it comes to security issues. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. I think it was very enlightening to hear how you describe the interplay between the internal and external in practice, how they really play out in practice. And I think that there must be several questions from the audience to Nicu Popescu. Nicu is here for another 15 minutes, and I think that we can now take at least 3 to 6 questions from the audience so that he has enough time to respond to those questions, and then we will continue with Peter and sort of the EU agenda for the next decade. But first, perhaps a question from me to Nicu. So, for the these are really critical times in your country. So, what would be the most useful and most needed support for your government and for your country at this very critical time? Sort of top 3 priorities. Where do you need the EU?
I mean, the truth is that we are getting this support already. As I said, market access means jobs, salaries, taxes. Taxes means education, healthcare. We have all of these things because of the fact that our goods can get on the European market. Our producers can sell these goods on the European market. On specifics, Peter and his colleagues and Ambassador Michalko has worked tirelessly from day one to help this government deliver. We've asked the EU to increase our quotas in summer, and we got this. So now we can export even more to the European market. And we faced a situation, the previous government adopted a budget that could not be sustained. It was a pre-election budget. We had parliamentary elections in February, so the budget was ballooned as a way to offer, cash payments to the citizens before the elections, but actually the country was not supposed to have these real-life incomes. So any government would have been in a position, but us, would have been in a position to cut salaries around summer and to cut the budget. Because the budget that the previous government adopted late last year was a fake budget. It came with fake numbers and fake incomes. But in summer, thanks to the European Union, we could sustain this budget. So we did not cut salaries, we did not reduce the spending with IMF support and with European contribution. And now, it's almost weekly that the European Union announces new grants and new assistance to Moldova. So on this front, the Europeans have been really strong and very fast in helping us be stable economically and politically.
Great, thank you so much. And now I take questions from the audience, but only those questions that are addressed to Foreign Minister. So, please. Right. Shall I give this?
Thank you, Minister, for explaining the intricacies of present Moldovan foreign policy. Only a few years ago, Moldova was the clear frontrunner in the Eastern Partnership. So my question, is it your intention, would it be your intention, can it be your intention to make Moldova a frontrunner again? Thanks.
And yes, Tony?
Thank you very much, and great to see a former think tanker now in this present job, and here in Chisinau. Two questions in one. One is, where do you see relations with the Eurasian Economic Union for Moldova going? And a question which is somehow more related, how do you see the challenge of China and the Belt and Road Initiative and broader connectivity? So are we going to change the discussion from Lisbon to Vladivostok into Lisbon to Shanghai? And how do you see Moldova's position in this?
Thank you. My name is Irina Petrova. I'm a researcher at the University of Leuven and University of Kent. I've got a question about local ownership. As you know, in 2015, the European Union proclaimed local ownership as the new hallmark of the new Eastern Partnership or European neighborhood policy overall. But basically, joint ownership was sort of already proclaimed in 2004 and then was traveling from one European document to another. So my question is, how would you evaluate whether there is enough local ownership today in Moldova, and what are the ways and mechanisms of increasing it in future? Thank you.
Okay. So please.
Front runner. So do we want to be a front runner? Listen, I've been following these Eastern Partnership conversations for more than 15 years from. What was it? The joint letter of Chris Patten and Javier Solana in April 2002, which resulted in the European Commission communication in March 2003. And what I witnessed in these 16 years is that After the Rose Revolution, Georgia was a front runner. When the Orange Revolution happened, and when Ukraine was a front runner, and when the transition happened in Moldova in 2009, and Moldova was a front runner, and then the revolution in Ukraine happened, and Ukraine was a front runner, and all of this cycle of ever-changing front runners and success stories is fine. But the truth is that all of these countries, including ours, are in a geopolitical environment and with a domestic societal structure and domestic economies that are hard and do not give us enough of a springboard to become very quickly major success stories like Norway or Switzerland and other non-EU European countries. So I think that's not the point, who is a success story and who is a front runner. The point is that all of these countries have major domestic, economic, and societal, and democratic, and institutional problems. And we are far from Norway, and we'll need to fight hard and for many, many years until we become real success stories. At the same time, I think successes, and I spoke about it, there have been significant successes, we should build on that. And from a European standpoint, I don't want to get into your part of the, program, but I think also for the European Union it's pretty obvious that these countries are not as well governed as Norway. So if they are not as well governed as Norway, you're not supposed to be disappointed, you're not supposed to have fatigue. You're supposed to continuously help the right, forces in these countries to transform them. So that is why I don't think front runner or not is the dilemma. The dilemma is how do we have a sustained engagement with these countries for the next 30 years or 20 years to turn them into better governed, more secure, more prosperous states. The Eurasian Union. When it comes to the Eurasian Union, engagement with the Eurasian Union does not form part of continuity of previously existing Moldovan foreign policy. There is no agreement between the constituent part of the parliamentary majority in Moldova on, changing the existing relationship with the Eurasian Union. Now, I had this conversation with my Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, where Russia signaled that they would be open to developing some kind of dialogue along the Eurasian Union front. And what our position as a government and as a parliamentary majority is that we do not have problems that we need to solve in relations with the Eurasian Union. We do not have trade problems that we need to solve with Belarus or Kazakhstan or Armenia. There are bilateral trade issues between Moldova and Russia. These trade issues have been applied to Moldova through documents issued by the government of the Russian Federation in August 2014, which suspend the existing free trade area between Moldova and other CIS states. Belarus does not implement trade restrictions on Moldovan exports, Armenia does not, Ukraine does not. So we are looking for a solution for our trade issues with the Russian Federation in a bilateral regime, because these trade issues arose in a bilateral regime. So this is my answer to the Eurasian Union question. China. Now everyone discusses China, and I talked also, the EU about it and the US about it, and with our Chinese friends and with our neighbors, Romania and Ukraine. What I see is that in countries, our neighbors, Ukraine and Romania, they tend to have more cooperative projects and plans under the Belt and Road Initiative or in a bilateral regime. If you look at the map, you'd see that Moldova does not look like a logical, unavoidable, chain in whatever the Belt and Road Initiative will become. So there is a bilateral agenda, we're talking about it. But if I look around, I see that our neighbors have more substantial conversations because their geography makes them more unavoidable than we are. Local ownership, I mean, all of the things that we discuss as part of Eastern Partnership agenda, they are local ownership. I mean, the right of Moldovans to travel visa-free, to use low-cost airlines, to want a less corrupt state. This is all locally owned. The EU is just an actor that helps us deliver on our local agenda and on our local needs and priorities. So the European Union comes with financing, with political messaging, with diplomatic interventions, with conditionality when it is needed, and they've been fully supportive of this locally driven desire of Moldovans to be better governed. So there is full local ownership, and because our economy exists because it can export to the European market, trust me, there is nothing more locally owned than your salary coming at the end of the month, and which comes from our exporters to the European Union market, from the taxes and duties they pay. So yes, the benefits we get for the Eastern Partnership, every single citizen of Moldova feels them in their pocket at the end of the month. And we want these salaries to be higher, and we want more jobs. And with European Union support, we'll get there. We'll get higher salaries and we'll get more jobs. But so far, this is the Eastern Partnership agenda that people feel.
Excellent, thank you. I guess you have still 5 minutes left, so if there are any more questions from the audience, this is your chance to address those issues. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Elena Marzak from Moldova. Thank you, Minister, for this open discussions about the benefits for the Eastern Partnership, and all speakers mentioned already that there are some constraints, there are a specific environment, and it's our national interest to develop these countermeasures, and for this we need the synergy of the institutions to develop our own message. As you mentioned already, the message for the, as I correctly understood, for the external audience, that we continue and the government continue its engagement with the international organization and donors and partners. What will be our own message for our citizens and explaining them the benefits and having their sympathy towards this direction of development of Republic of Moldova? Thank you.
Yes, and there is one more in the back.
Hello, Miruna Troncota from SNSP, National University in Bucharest. Of course, Minister, I would really be interested in how you see, first of all, how would you evaluate Romania's presidency in EU Council with regard to support for EaP countries? I mean, we were leading EU Council during the anniversary, but still there were many critical points towards that. So I'm interested in that. And also, what's your expectations from next years from Romanian support in terms of EaP?
Thank you. I think that was all, and that's actually also the questions that we have time for. So please, Mr. Minister.
Listen, the benefits, I spoke about it. I mean, 100% of Moldovan citizens want, as I said, European schools, roads, institutions, courts. These are the benefits, and they all know it. The problem is with the political elites that for the last almost 30 years, they weren't that good at delivering all of this. We went through ups and downs, but I think the benefits of European integration and European standards are obvious to everyone. And I don't know any Moldovan who strives for non-European roads and courts. The Romanian presidency and Romania. Listen, we had, parliamentary elections in February, and the government was formed at the beginning of June. So from a Moldovan standpoint, the Romanian presidency was a moment when Moldovan politics was either campaigning or trying to come up with a governing majority. So there wasn't a lot of real life interaction for these reasons. At the same time, the the question about our relations with Romania is much bigger than the presidency. So, I really have to actually leave earlier, and I'm sorry, because I need to speak to Ramona Manescu on the phone, and she's in Brussels today, because I need to get 2 letters signed to the Romanian government by 5 p.m. today on 2 concrete projects that we're talking about, and I'll give you now more details. And I spoke today already to... Now, what do we do with Romania? We have a lot of projects going on. The most important one for now is the fact that Romania is building a gas pipeline to Moldova, which will dramatically improve Moldova's energy security, and it will be the first time that the Moldovans will be able to buy gas from elsewhere. That pipeline should be ready by spring. 18th of February is the current date, but a few weeks here and there would not change much. And every single day, some 500-600 meters of this pipeline are laid. So yesterday they laid 500-600 meters. Today they are laying 500-600 meters. So this pipeline will be on stream in time, thanks to Romania. We're also talking, I've mentioned this many times, this abolition of roaming costs between Moldova and Romania. And one of these days, we offered Romania one way to find a solution to this problem, and one of these days, the Romanian government needs to send us a response to our concrete proposals on what we call home routing. So we're trying to get somewhere to a situation where when our citizens cross the border, they do not need to pay these crazy prices for roaming. We've also put together now a list of 23 projects that Romania could finance under the so-called Protocol 6, but we're waiting for the Romanian government to be formed so that we can sign this protocol. But we're ready to go there any moment. If Romania has a government in 10 days, we take we take a flight or they come here, we're ready to sign that any moment. So, besides political partnership, which is good, political dialogue, diplomatic interaction, security dialogue, everything is great. But we're also having a very detailed agenda where we want deliverables with Romania in the next few months. And things are going well. And yes, and this will bring concrete results to our citizens. Thank you. And I apologize, I need to take off and try and deliver these results in real life bureaucratic workflow and documents flow, but I'll join you later tonight and we can have another conversation that builds on the existing conversation.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Minister. Thank you for finding the time to come here. Yeah, thanks. Okay, but we shall proceed. Last but certainly not least, we have Ambassador Peter Mihalko. And perhaps, you already got some positive feedback from Mr. Minister on the contribution of the EU to the to supporting Moldova, but I think perhaps we could widen the perspective somewhat and also link it with the debates in Brussels right now. Because in September we all read online the President-elect of the European Commission, von der Leyen's mission letter to the Commissioner-elect of Enlargement and Neighbourhood. And what we learned from that was definitely that that the President would like to take the Eastern Partnership to the next level. But what on earth does that mean? What is both realistic and innovative relationship with the Eastern partners in future? Please.
Thank you very much, and indeed this is for me a great pleasure, also honor to be on this panel with distinguished scholars, and one of them having become Minister of Foreign Affairs, this perhaps is always a challenge when we invite ambassador to be in one panel with think tankers, with scholars, that you might risk that this freedom of thinking will be expressed, but will be expressed maybe in more official lines referring to also the substance that we have in this case the Eastern Partnership. Unfortunately, in these 10 years, we have accumulated enough experience and enough history and enough outcomes that we can speak about and reflect on. I'm also glad that we have heard about reflections on what the Eastern Partnership has brought already, because this is what I think we have to focus on. Anyway, in my mandate as diplomat, this is what I have to focus on, and I prefer not to speak about the failures, because that word has a kind of definite meaning that we have to overcome, of course, and we have to turn this into results, positive results and benefits. But in these 10 years, and I personally can reflect that I was actually in Chisinau, those days when in Prague the Eastern Partnership was established, that this new policy was established with certain goals, and when we look back on this 10 years, we should first of all come back to those goals, and this is what I always do. And when I reflect, I look to what we wanted to do at that time, and we saw the Eastern Partnership being established on the principles of international law and fundamental values, including democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, as well as to market economy, sustainable development, and good governance. And in this regard, the main goal is stated as to create necessary conditions to accelerate political association and further economic integration between the EU and interested partner countries, and the partnership will seek to support political and socio-economic reforms of the partner countries, facilitating approximation towards the European Union. With this, we actually set the framework in which we have lived during the following 10 years, but also the set of standards, what Nicu Popescu named as the set of European standards, to which everything that has been happening in the Eastern Partnership was compared. When we speak about developments, when we speak about progress, but also when we speak about difficult moments, when we saw lack of fulfillment of standards and commitments, this was always related to this set of standards. And this was always the guiding principle for the European Union in its approach and its reaction to the development. So it was natural after the establishment of this relationship. And by the way, we could think about how would this relationship look like or function without this set of standards, without this orientation points that we have. That we had an agenda which was more immediate. It was mentioned also very concretely in the initial document, and this was association agreements to be concluded with those partners who were interested in that, also visa liberalization. And we had also the principle of conditionality embedded in our partnership from the very beginning. So it was natural that there was a certain goal to which partners were aiming, some of them quickly, some of them less quickly. Also, this was about trust in possibility for these standards to be achieved. Here we come to the issue of frontrunners. Well, frontrunners, of course, to run is important if it means to move forward, because one can run in different directions, and unfortunately sometimes we saw our partners running not only forwards, if you want, and even being front runners positively or in some other sense. But what we saw always was that the EU was reacting to developments when they took a negative turn. When we saw that those standards towards which we agreed with our partners to work together, that we saw them actually departing, and then we saw our partners moving away from them. And this is where we come to maybe issue of fundamental standards, of values that we referred to, that at the beginning were taken as assumed fundamentals existing. But then we saw that confirmation of words that every day there is a need to fight for democracy, to fight for respect of rule of law, that were true. And we saw even some regress in some of our partners. And we also saw corruption as being the root of all evils, if you want me to put it this way, because we saw that regress being its standards of democracy, of rule of law, deterioration in justice sectors, that was caused or connected to lack of fight against corruption, or sometimes even with corruption extended into even endemic measure. Now, in this regard, it was natural that conditionality had to appear as a living and vivid principle being applied. And it happened. I will refer to Moldova because this is my mandate to speak about. But of course this was necessary. When we proclaimed principle more for more, but there was of course connected understanding of less for less. That was the time when it had to appear, because in our relationship we have to be credible. We have to be credible first of all to the citizens of countries, of all partner countries. And when I say partner countries, I mean all countries of the EU, but also Eastern partner countries, because we are all partners in this partnership. So we applied conditionality, and we also increased our communication. And that was mentioned, that we were also in a position to learn, to work not only with partners at the governmental level. We will, of course, always work with the governments that are elected by the people, but we had to speak with the people as final beneficiaries of this partnership, of our assistance. We had to also improve or refine, if you want, our engagement that for sure is here, and this is a very developed form of our engagement, Eastern Partnership. From simple policies and assistance, we had to bring in also communication into an engagement triangle in which we explain what we are doing and why we are doing it, and people can make up their mind, and they can understand the European Union as the partner. Through this, we increased also resilience of our partners, which was an important aspect, because we saw that by deterioration of standards, if we do not address them, do not help these partner countries to address them, that our own image of our partnership would be under danger. And also we had the new realities. We were under, let's say, under attack through new ways of threats that came. So we certainly changed this approach, but also I want to say this will be also the guiding principle for us for next stage, the next level that you mentioned. These goals will remain. Final sentence is that I think that Eastern Partnership for the first time ever has brought also new quality of engagement of civil society in the foreign policy making, because this what we are, the third pillar of Eastern Partnership, also today's meeting is something new, also for the European Union, but also for partner countries. And my colleague Vasilis Marangos will address issues of the future also in his next speech.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Mihalko. I'm really happy to see Stanislav Secrieru here in this room today. And I would also like to invite Stanislav to share his observations and lessons learned. Perhaps I would like to encourage Stanislav, you to emphasize the next steps rather than reflect on the past, because I think this would link nicely to Ambassador Mihalko's comments.
Yeah, I would like to apologize for being late, but I'm the living proof that Common Aviation Area works. I missed my flight, and 10 years ago I would spend hours and hours in airport to catch a flight to Chisinau. Thanks to liberalization of aviation market, I caught my flight from Frankfurt because there are more flights to Germany, from Germany to Moldova now. So this is how Eastern Partnership actually works in real life. I think I will build on some things which already mentioned, and I will try to look forward. What is the agenda for the future for Eastern Partnership? And I think Minister Popescu alluded to this, that the transformations in Eastern neighborhood were not linear. They are rather taking the zigzagging form. So sometimes this zigzagging is encouraging because states take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Sometimes this zigzagging is very discouraging because they take 2 steps back and 1 step forward. I mean, for you, it means that there is need for strategic patience, flexibility to reorient funds, and ability to work with different kind of actors. And His Excellency Ambassador mentioned this lesson learned. And as we've discovered that the entire debate about frontrunners was toxic for all 3 association member states, I would rather replace frontrunners with implementers. Because what probably will have to focus, and EU as such, and societies and monitors, are on the implementation of reforms. Then we are talking about future of Eastern Partnership. Somehow differentiation is a taboo word because it might dilute the power of Eastern Partnership. I would argue otherwise. Differentiation is what will make Eastern Partnership stronger. Because all 6 Eastern Partnership members want differentiation. They're in different regional setting, they're facing different economic challenges and security challenges, and they need a different kind of approach from EU side in order to get support in dealing with these challenges. For instance, for Azerbaijan, it's not a problem of energy security. It's rather a problem how to find new markets to export oil and gas. Well, for Moldova, it's a problem of energy security because Moldova needs new sources of supply, gas supply. Then I think we don't have to be scared of word differentiation. What we have probably to introduce in this equation is a smart differentiation. We can think about Eastern Partnership in terms of smartphone with different applications, and we select the set of applications which are catering towards the need of Moldova, towards the needs of Georgia, or towards the needs of Ukraine or other members of Eastern Partnership. I think another interesting element is corruption. Our research revealed that in all Eastern Partnership countries, societies expect from you to do more in helping combating corruption. Second thing is that in all 6 Eastern Partnership countries, people find the assistance in tackling corruption the less efficient tool in the EU's toolbox. I've been observing the changes how EU addresses this issue, and it's linked to the fact that corruption is not only perceived as an economic issue, but also security. And these changes took place actually in Ukraine. and I don't want to repeat what Leo said, but it's a more on-hands approach, when it's not only about adopting legislation like it was before, it's just creating independent institutions which survive the change of a government and elections in each country. And this means not only adopting the right legislation, but also actively participating as a donor in the selection of judges or prosecutors. And this positive practice, which was tested first time in Ukraine, can and shall be replicated in case of Moldova. Second, focus on the preventive element, not only on punishment. Punishment is important in order to enforce the accountability of elites which were often corrupt, but also prevention is essential element in combating corruption. I think then the letter which Sinikuka mentioned, the future of Eastern Partnership, there is an important sentence there that the incoming commissioner is tasked to look for new sectors of cooperation with Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. And I would like to be very specific. I would suggest, and it's in our publication as well, the next step will be money Schengen. Why not to integrate these three countries in the single European payment system? And it helps to solve many issues. It builds the power of conditionality of EU, which can introduce additional conditionality in order to continue reforms of banking sector, to introduce more elements to combat money laundering, which is a debate as well inside the EU, how better to tackle this problem. Instead of waiting when these problems come to EU, it's better to address it preventively and introducing conditionalities so these countries continue the reforms. But then it's a next logical step, because EU partially introduced those freedoms on which EU stands. These countries have free countries. They have facilitated free trade with goods and services. They have already facilitated access visa-free, but not for work. So the next logical step is to make money circulate much faster in support of goods, services, and people. This is the win-win situation for EU and Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. The next area, and it was mentioned, security. We are living in different security environment from 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, nobody was discussing cybersecurity. But the first debate about cybersecurity took place in the United States in the 50s. We are rediscovering cybersecurity now. In the next decade, cybersecurity and digital markets will be a big issue. This is the area probably which Eastern Partnership shall focus in the next decade. It's enhancing cybersecurity of these countries as they introduce more e-governance, as they will rely more in the health sector, in other sectors on e-services. They will become even more vulnerable than they are now. As the e-infrastructure will expand, the temptation to hurt them through cyber tools will be higher. And then on communication, the last point. I think EU had a very noble approach in 2009 that deeds will talk instead of words. The assumption of EU was that we are doing right thing, and it's true, and people will judge us according to the deeds. What we've discovered in those 10 years, it's not enough just to do right things. It's necessarily also to present the way they are. Because we are dealing with a new type of political closed regimes which are leveraging information space in order to dissimulate or create an alternative reality. Last element on the communication. We've been communicating about how Eastern Partnership serves Eastern Partnership countries. And I think we underplayed and neglected how to communicate how Eastern Partnership serving EU citizens as well. Because it works both ways. Because EU trades more with Eastern Partnership. Tourist sectors are benefiting of visa-free. Many other areas we can identify where EU citizens on the winning side as well. So probably in the next decade is we are thinking about communication is also to communicate better to citizens in the EU in order to increase the ownership of EU as well. How beneficial Eastern Partnership is for EU as well. here I will conclude. Thank you.
Excellent. And now comments, questions from the audience. You can address all of the speakers and all of the portfolios and agendas. Can I see any? Yeah. Well, in that case, if we don't have questions from the audience, I would like to invite our panelists to comment on each other's comments. And at least I can see a clear emphasis on the kind of like making this a real partnership that benefits both, and it's not really a charity project, but really benefits both sides equally. So, so please, comments.
Thank you very much, Sini, and I think Stas made a very comprehensive, very exhaustive, very to the point presentation, which somehow concludes our thoughts and the parts that we have not been addressing in the introductory remarks. I would just add a few things which we have been discussing it. I'm sure it is discussed among you member states now, among Eastern Partnership countries. It's also part of the structured reflection process that the EAS has started. What to do institutionally with Eastern Partnership, how to make it work. And I know that there is some discussion within member states about maybe why not creating a secretariat of Eastern Partnership. And I know that there is some reluctance about it from some member states. But really, the point is to try to create more ownership from not only from Commission, not only from from European External Action Service, not only from Brussels. Because now what we have is somehow we are invited to meetings, we're invited to workshops, panels, platforms, and all this job is done by people in Commission, in EAS, and sometimes Secoforma or whatever companies contracting our planes or accommodation. And then we come back to our capitals, irrespective of who we are, experts, officials, diplomats, and we continue our job on a daily basis. And we somehow do Eastern Partnership from meetings to meetings. And why not really think about trying to bring together officials, diplomats, experts from EAS, from Commission, from member states, from Eastern Partnership countries, delegate them, contract them, hire them, put them to work together in one place in Brussels or some other place, but probably in Brussels it's much easier. And really assign them the task to steer the process of implementing whatever objectives we set up for ourselves in terms of Eastern Partnership. I think that will bring more responsibility, more co-ownership, and I think that will steer much better the process of Eastern Partnership. I think that is one thing that I wanted to reflect on, and again, I'd like to throw it at you. Maybe you have other ideas, and please challenge them. Another point, I think we need more interaction without overloading the work of the Council. But I think it helps over lunches, over dinners, or over separate formats of the Council, whatever, Transport Council, GHA Council, to have these Council meetings with Eastern Partnership countries. In whatever formats, depending on the subject. It may be Council plus 3 Eastern Partnership countries, like we had now piloted with this DCFTA ministerials. I think that it will bring more somehow interaction at the ministerial level, more practical level. It will also I think that would also help, and that is also can be replicated for our people in Brussels. I mean, we have COREPER, we have COEST. Why not to have more interaction at that level? Between our missions in Brussels, I mean, we have that usually before negotiating statements of the Eastern Partnership summits, and that work starts 3-4 months before the summit. Probably we will replicate that, but it's even more important to do that in the meantime. So to have that more close interaction, because I think there, to me, the perception is somehow that the driver of the Eastern Partnership is EU, is Brussels, and we are only passengers.
Thank you. I would like to give the chance to Leo and Vano to also react and also reflect on the on Stanislav's and Julian's ideas for the future.
Yeah, I will be very, very short and very brief. I would absolutely co-sign what Julian said. And I would just add up there one important point, which I have been repeating every time when I'm coming here in Chisinau. This is the bilateral track of the Eastern Partnership, and I don't think that it works. And one of the clear evidence for me that it's not working properly is that Moldova has no embassy in Georgia. It's for me, it's kind of, you know, clear evidence that this is not working very well, and I wished to say this while the minister was here, but I hope that I will pass this message to him. And then when it comes to the consultation, I think that definitely I don't have a feeling that there is a close and intensive consultation at the high level between Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. And I think that it only takes place, as Julian said, like several weeks or several months before the Eastern Partnership, and once the Eastern Partnership declaration is tabled, if any, then it's just, you know, disappears, this cooperation. I think that it should be on a regular basis rather than taking place only before the summits.
Leo.
Thank you. I think that Stas underlined, from a Ukrainian perspective, Stas underlined very important things, especially the security dimension. For us, this is a top priority these days. I mean, not disregarding certainly the implementation of association agreement, the fight against corruption, and other reforms which are important for Ukraine and which bring real benefits. But as we struggle to defend our territory, and Moldova and Georgia also does, I think if Eastern Partnership would bring some added value in this respect, then certainly we can count the reviving of Eastern Partnership as being something of really useful and of added value. And quite often in Ukraine we say that if Eastern Partnership wants to remain relevant, then it has to consider also the concerns of these countries, despite the fact that I understand there is no much will in the EU, in some of the EU countries, maybe that's why the EU position is affected as well, to deal more with the security, not from, as I told you earlier, as I said earlier, not from a EU perspective when we deal only with fight against corruption, which is good, I underline this, but also from a different perspective as well.
Great, thank you. And then, last but not least, Peter.
Thank you. Maybe 2 sentences and 2 points. With the Eastern Partnership, we created an unprecedented level of relationship between the Eastern partner countries and the EU countries today. Also unprecedented intensity of dialogue, of contacts, of cooperation. It is a moment that needs to be used in full, especially those openings, those chances that are created by the association agreements and deep and comprehensive free trade agreements. Because if we compare, if we try to use historical comparisons, in the face of association with the European Union, those countries who went through that phase and even made it further, that was the moment when they actually increased their economies, they fixed their institutions to the level that then allowed them to aspire for much more. So this is a call on our partners to use this momentum, to use these chances. And the second thing is we have to find a way, and now through 20 deliverables for 2020 that are fully in the framework that we established actually in 2009, we have to find a way how results of Eastern Partnership are tangible for the people. There is no other reward than support of the people that is based on their own experience with benefits of this cooperation.
Excellent, thank you. Well, yes, a very final remark.
Thank you. Is it on? I would like to respond to the moderator's invitation to comment focusing on where do we go from here rather than reflecting on the past. And I'd like to start by applauding Stanislav's recommendation to stop talking about front runners and talk instead about implementers. This coincides with what I am recommending to my Moldovan friends, namely to stop talking about European integration and talk instead about simply implementing the association agreement. That is the name of the game. So stop talking about oversized or ill-timed ambitions. That's the first comment. The next, sectoral cooperation as recommended in Frau von der Leyen's letter would only work if the local governments are committed to it. For the moment, the uppermost task of the local governments in Moldova and Ukraine foremost, is to achieve the freeing of the state from captivity. This process is being referred to as de-oligarchization. This is a misnomer. In Moldova, as in Georgia, we never had oligarchic rule. We had one person rule and one group rule. Oligarchy is by definition a group phenomenon consisting of a number of players with comparable strengths who constantly negotiate and renegotiate the distribution of power among themselves. This is what we have had in Ukraine, but not in Moldova and Georgia. The mission is to free the state from captivity. Moldova and Ukraine are formulating two radically different answers to this mission. In Moldova, we have a broadly representative coalition government consisting of two rival political forces that have found common ground for cooperation in a representative, broadly representative, and therefore potentially unstable government. In Ukraine, we have the opposite solution. We have a new, unprecedented for Ukraine, parliamentary majority, absolute parliamentary majority of one party, called in Ukraine monomajority. These are two radically different responses in Ukraine and in Moldova to the same mission of freeing the state from captivity. And we are not sure where these two different responses are headed, because both contain inherent instabilities. In Moldova, because, as I mentioned, because of the ad hoc nature of the coalition, and in Ukraine, because we are not entirely sure who takes the decision, whether President Zelensky or the circle behind him, and we are also not sure about President Zelensky's relationships with Ukrainian oligarchs. Kolomoisky, Pinchuk, and most recently Khodorkovsky have entered into contact with direct contact with the Zelensky government. So these are the unknowns that we face in response to the same mission in both countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this contribution. I'm afraid that we are running out of time, so we have to continue this debate when having dinner and when having the guided tour. But let me just ask you to join me in thanking the organizers as well as the panelists for very enlightening, stimulating panel. Thank you so much.
Now, thank you very much, Sini, for doing a great job in moderating this improvised session, because they changed roles with Stas, and Stas made a very good point at the end. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for being with us, Leo Vano. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Vasilis Maragos, Head of Unit of DG NEAR from the European Commission, and give us a bit of the takeaway that he takes with him after this discussion, inviting him to do a set of concluding remarks of the Eastern Partnership Reflection Forum of these 2 days. Please, Vasilis.
Thanks a lot. They leave me alone. No, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here, and also other colleagues, of course, the ambassador. This was a great opportunity to exchange views between experienced, competent, and inspiring speakers. We are in a listening mode, as I have said earlier, and we are taking very good note of everything which we have heard. I think many great ideas. We have to continue engaging so that we can see how much of this can enter the political arena of building and upscaling the consensus which exists in the European Union. I would like to stress that on an overall successful policy. We still have challenges. I think we discussed about them during these 2 days, but I think also we have a very good basis to address them, hopefully successfully. So my first point, my first takeaway is about communication. Dialogue, the role of think tanks, the role of the civil society, the engagement with EU citizens as well, which probably we have underestimated during this past period. I think it is essential. We have had the Civil Society Forum in the first panel yesterday. I think it is an important element of our engagement, which brings together not only civil society from the Eastern partner countries, but also from the EU. But I take the comment, and I think that we have to make efforts on the side of the institutions and the member states to further engage on that. But of course, let me underline, it was said by Ambassador Michalko, we have already created tremendous opportunities for people, for businesses to engage across the various borders, I think also across the borders between the Eastern partner countries, but of course the attraction power of the EU member states is bigger. Just one element of, let's say, self-criticism on the side of the institutions. We have many more Erasmus students coming to EU universities rather the other way around. And I really think that it would be equally useful and equally beneficial to have more EU students coming to Eastern partner countries. My second point, and it is a difficult one, I think we devoted a lot of energy to discuss it. The minister made, I think, a very good point about this, very constructive. Differentiation and inclusivity. It's a thin line. We need both. We need both differentiation, but we also need inclusivity. It's a matter of choice, it is a matter of opportunities, and it is certainly a matter of going together, addressing the common challenges together. Because without these two, we cannot have ownership. Ownership is also essential. I would like also to thank you for all the comments that you have made about the language concerning front runners, front running, etc. I think this is certainly not very fortunate because it gives the impression that you rank the people, you rank the walking, the rhythm, etc. I liked very much your comments about implementers, deliverers, and this brings me actually to my third point. This is about delivering. I took note also of what was said earlier about strategic passions. I think this is a good notion of strategy, but actually passions does not mean that you should not act. On the contrary, I think that we have to act. We should not lose a day in front of the challenges that we face, in front of the expectations of the citizens that we face. So we have to deliver. And actually, what do we have to deliver? We have to deliver reforms. I think this is essential, and the EU will support, but of course the political will is essential here. So we are engaging in different ways. It is not always, actually our current commissioner likes very much to use the expression of megaphone diplomacy. You know, we are not on the megaphone diplomacy, but we are engaging with partners so that we can be efficient. So it is not about having meetings. It is about being efficient as a partner, but the political will lies with the with the partner countries. And the civil society, of course, plays a big role. And here comes also the notion of conditionality. It was discussed. I think we really need to use this in a smart way. And actually the conditionality should not be an imposed conditionality. It should be the conditionality which exists between partners, the conditionality that the people expect from us. And this brings me actually to the main point that I want to make about the current shape of the Eastern Partnership, both bilateral and multilateral, but also the future. And this brings us also to the next Commission. It's about putting people first. We should see everything that we are doing from the point of view of people, of the expectations of people. People have a daily life. They have families, they have health issues, they have expectations from the justice system. It's not about who appoints the judges. It is about what is the final product, how much this delivers, what the people expect. So I think that our values have to become the values of the people, should not be the values of intellectuals who are sitting in meetings in Strasbourg or in Brussels or even in Rome or in Berlin, but it should be the common values embraced by the people. This is why actually the communication, the way we communicate about what we are doing together is essential. So justice is about a fairer society. It is not so much about what is the salary of a judge and who appoints the Supreme Court judge. This is a technical issue. The key issue is actually to have to deliver what the people are expecting. So I would really like to see also corruption from this point of view. The people expect fairness also at all layers of the political system, and this is also only what brings trust to us. Now, my fourth point is about the third actors. I think we should not disregard this element, but we should not also underestimate the force of the partnership. We have the European Union on the one side. The consensus which exists on this policy in the European Union is very, very strong. Our motto at the last summit was stronger together, and I think that this exists. This is there. So we should build on this strength in order to deliver. The key other actors, outside actors, are important. Sometimes they want to disrupt. I was expecting also more discussion during these days about how much those actors, like for instance we heard about Switzerland in the beginning of the first session, probably could be more involved. I think we have to be open, and we should be open to this, but we should not forget as well that this is a partnership between the European Union and the Eastern partners, and we live of course in an open society, in a globalized world, but we have to focus on that. And here it is really about the new challenges. We talked about hybrid threats, we talked about new security challenges, we talked about digitalization, which brings challenge, but also which brings tremendous new opportunities. The single European payment area, I think, is one of the ideas that we have to further explore. It's a complex issue because for the moment, let's not forget, this covers payments in euro. So we have really to see how much of the transactions that the people would like to make, for instance, in cross-border daily commerce would be covered by this. But we are ready, absolutely ready to discuss this, and I hope that we can bring this up in the future communication. Finally, I would like also from my side to thank, of course, the organizers, but also I would like to really express my gratitude to the attention we have received and you have received from the government of our host government, the Republic of Moldova. I think I was really impressed by both presentations by Prime Minister Sandu and Foreign Minister Popescu, and all the other comments that we have heard from officials, including Daniela today and yesterday. I think this demonstrates the strength actually of the Eastern Partnership. We are here talking about strong ownership and strong readiness to deliver. So I would really think that this is one of the assets that we have. Finally, before closing, I would like to recall a little bit the timelines from our side. So we have an EU survey which is open up to the end of October. We expect inputs from individuals, from the civil society. We have received a lot of inputs already from member states, and we start to receive from partner countries, but also from other EU institutions like the Economic and Social Committee, the Committee of Regions, and others. We have also received a lot from the Youth Forum. So we are really building a very solid basis for the future policy proposals. The Commission proposals, what the Commissioner designate has received as a task, is not coming out of the void. It's coming out of a very strong commitment through an inclusive process. So I would like really to stress that, and also to thank you for being engaged in this, and I believe that we can have more engagement also with the think tanks in the run-up to the final proposals by the Commission. The European Council has charged the Commission and the EAS to prepare these policy proposals by early 2020. This will happen, hopefully with the new Commission taking office soon. And of course, after that, we are ready to discuss them, to engage again with the civil society, again with the stakeholders, but also with the partner countries, foreign ministers, but also sectoral ministers. We already had, I think it's an excellent idea to have all these ministerial meetings. We had, of course, quite a few, and we use them in order to promote this sectoral coordination and cooperation. For instance, this year we had transport in June, we had energy in February, and we are going to have next month education under the Finnish presidency. It is essential to continue, of course, in the same vein and even scale this up. So we are going to discuss this, and we hope at the summit, at the next summit, it is not yet confirmed, but we hope it will take place during the Croatian presidency, as initially, mentioned. We are going to strengthen the consensus that we have between the European Union and the Eastern partner countries, and we are going to use all these opportunities in order to upgrade our commitment to deliver for the people. So thank you once more, and I'm looking forward to further engaging with you and all the stakeholders in this process. Thank you.
I'll just say like this. Thank you very much, Sponsor this, others for this. For these 2 days of discussion in different formats, in closed format, in open format, benefiting from contributions from policymakers, high-level policymakers, think tankers, academia. That is really important for us and for the work that we've prepared together with our colleagues from Austrian-French Rapprochement Center in Europe. I'd like just to give maybe, Dietmar, if you want to say a few words at the end to thank our partners and co-supporters, and then I'll just before, just as you're sitting, I just make an announcement. We are continuing the discussion in an informal setting during our networking informal discussion, which will follow immediately after this session. So you all are invited. I hope we'll have a minister there. I hope other colleagues and ambassadors could join there, and we will have more informal continuation of a discussion that we started today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a few words from my side. The Austro-French Center for Rapprochement in Europe has been very privileged to be associated to this process from the very beginning, which started 2 years ago in Minsk. I think the conclusion, the contributions, the way this was organized and brought together so many different actors from think tanks, but also officials nationally from the European Commission, showed that this is a format which indeed is a very useful one, and I do hope that we will be able to continue this, that this should not be the third edition and the last one, but it should be after 10 years of the Eastern Partnership. With everything we heard the Commission is preparing on the mandate also from Member States, this should be also an inspiration to continue this in the future. And I, who am new in this function, really greatly appreciated the contributions I had been able to witness over the past 2 days. I think it's extremely useful, and I will be committed to work on this in the future. So thank you very much, and thanks to all our partners who made this possible.
Just a announcement. The bus is leaving at 4:30. 4:30 from the
Thank you.